I still remember the day I first saw Eddie. He was just 4 years old, small and fragile, with eyes too big for his face, too full of questions the world hadn't answered for him yet. When I reached for his hand that day at the orphanage, he hesitated for only a moment before slipping his tiny fingers into mine. That was the moment I knew I was meant to be his mother. Raising Eddie was the most natural thing in the world. He needed love, and I had more than enough to give. I taught him to tie his shoes, to ride a bike, to stand up for himself when the other boys at school tried to push him around. When he fell, I picked him up. When he cried, I wiped his tears. And when he beamed up at me with pride after his first home run, his first science fair trophy, his first college acceptance letter, I swore I had never loved anyone more. But somewhere along the way something changed. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't a switch flipping in the night. It was a slow, creeping shift, so subtle I didn't even realize it was happening until it was too late. Eddie turned 19 last spring. A man now, with broad shoulders and a confidence I had worked so hard to instill in him. And yet, when I looked at him, I still saw traces of the little boy who once climbed into my bed after a nightmare, the child who held my hand so tightly whenever we crossed the street. Maybe that was why I didn't see it coming. We worked together now, at the same company on the same project. It had started as a way to mentor him, to give him guidance in his career. But we spent long hours together, side by side in the conference room, our heads bent over drafts and spreadsheets, laughing at inside jokes that no one else understood. One evening, after a particularly grueling meeting, we found ourselves alone in the office. The others had left for the night, and the only sound was the low hum of the city outside and the occasional shuffle of papers. I looked up from my laptop to find Eddie watching me. There was something in his expression I couldn't place. Something unfamiliar. "What is it?" I asked, closing my computer. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Nothing. Just thinking. About." He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his dark hair. "You know, most people don't get to work with their mom like this." I smiled, stretching my arms over my head. "Are you complaining?" "Never," he said too quickly. "I like it. I like spending time with you." There was warmth in his voice, something deep and earnest that made my stomach tighten. I ignored it, brushing it off as sentimentality. "Me too," I said, standing and gathering my things. "Come on, let's go home." But as I turned, I felt his hand graze my wrist, barely there, as if he had reached for me on instinct before thinking better of it. Froze. He dropped his hand immediately, looking away, and whatever had been in his eyes just moments ago was gone. "Yeah," he murmured, pushing back his chair. "Let's go home." But even as we left the office, as I laughed at something he said, as I drove us back through familiar streets to the house we had shared for 15 years, something between us had shifted. And I wasn't sure if we could ever go back. I told myself I was imagining things. That it was nothing more than the exhaustion of late nights and too many shared hours in close quarters. I had raised Eddie. I was his mother. There was no room for uncertainty in that. And yet, the feeling didn't go away. It lingered in the quiet moments. The way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The way he lingered at the dinner table after we'd finished eating, watching me with something unreadable in his expression. The way his voice softened when he said my name, like it meant something more than just what I had always been to him. One evening, as I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes, I felt him behind me before he even spoke. "Let me do that," he said, reaching past me for the dish towel. I laughed, shaking my head. "You never do the dishes. Maybe I'm turning over a new leaf." His voice was playful, but there was something else beneath it. I handed him a plate without thinking, and our fingers brushed. Just for a second, just long enough for the warmth of his skin to spark against mine. Pulled away first. "You have a date or something?" I asked, trying to fill the space with something light. "No." I glanced at him. "Why not? A guy like you should be out there." He smirked. "Maybe I haven't found the right girl." I rolled my eyes. "You're 19, Eddie. You have plenty of time." He didn't answer. Instead, he took the plate from my hand. His movements slower than necessary. The air between us felt thick, too charged for something so simple. I turned back to the sink, gripping the edge a little too tightly. "Sabrina." I hated the way my heart reacted when he said my name like that. Not mom. Not mother. Just my name, spoken so carefully, like he was testing it on his tongue. I swallowed hard. Yeah. There was a long silence before he said, "Nothing." But when I turned, I found him looking at me like he wanted to say something more. I left the kitchen first. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The logical part of me said it was nothing, that I was overthinking things. But another part of me, the part that had noticed the way he'd been acting lately, whispered something I wasn't ready to hear. The next few days passed in a strange, unspoken tension. We still worked together, still laughed in the office, still had dinner together in the evenings. But it was different now. Every touch felt magnified. Every glance held too much weight. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, and I had fallen asleep on the couch. A storm raged outside, rain beating against the windows, thunder rolling through the sky. I barely registered the sound of footsteps approaching until I felt a hand brush lightly against my arm. Sabrina. I blinked awake to find Eddie crouched in front of me, his face half lit by the glow of the television. "What is it?" I murmured, still half asleep. "You fell asleep out here." I shifted, rubbing my eyes. "Yeah, I guess I did." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly he reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. The touch was gentle, thoughtful. I stopped breathing. "You're always taking care of me," he said quietly. "But who takes care of you?" I didn't have an answer. The silence between us stretched too long, thick with something unspoken. His fingers lingered at the edge of my jaw, and I knew I should move. I should stand up, should laugh, should say something to break whatever was happening between us. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed there, caught between the past and something I didn't know how to name. "I should go to bed," I whispered. He nodded slowly but didn't move. Neither did I. Seconds passed and then, finally, he exhaled sharply and stood up, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, me too." I watched him go, my heart hammering, my thoughts a tangled mess of confusion and something else, something dangerous. Sleep didn't come easily that night. After that, things weren't the same. Eddie didn't pull away, didn't act like anything had changed. But I felt it in every interaction. It was in the way he stood a little closer than he used to. The way his hand would rest on the small of my back when he moved past me in the office, a touch so fleeting it could have been accidental, except it never was. The way he watched me, waiting for something, though I wasn't sure what. I tried to ignore it. I tried to pretend nothing was happening. But then, one evening, as I was preparing dinner, he walked up behind me and placed his hands on my shoulders. "Eddie," I said, forcing my voice to sound normal. "Relax," he murmured. "You've been tense all week." "I'm fine." His fingers pressed gently against my shoulders, the warmth of his touch seeping through the thin fabric of my blouse. Closed my eyes. This wasn't normal. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. But I didn't move. And that, I knew, was the real problem. I should have stopped him. I should have pulled away, laughed it off, told him not to be silly. But I didn't. I stood there, letting his hands rest on my shoulders, letting the warmth seep through my skin, letting myself forget, just for a moment, who we were supposed to be to each other. His fingers moved slowly, kneading the tension from my muscles with deliberate, careful pressure, and I hated how good it felt. How natural. "You work too hard," he murmured, his voice low and close to my ear. I swallowed, gripping the counter. "Eddie, just relax," he said, and I hated how soft his voice was. How much it reminded me of all the times he had taken care of me in small, quiet ways. Bringing me coffee when I forgot to eat. Carrying groceries in without being asked. Standing beside me in meetings when he could see I was exhausted. I had raised him. I had taught him everything he knew about life. And yet, in that moment, I didn't feel like his mother. Felt like a woman. And I knew I couldn't let that happen. I turned sharply, forcing space between us, forcing a smile onto my face that felt too tight. "You're right. I do work too hard. And you should be doing more of the cooking. Why don't you start chopping the vegetables?" For a second, I saw something flicker in his eyes, something like disappointment or maybe understanding. Then he nodded, stepping back, taking the hint. But the tension didn't leave the room. That night, I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain outside. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cool, damp stillness. I could hear the faint creak of the floorboards, the soft hum of the refrigerator. The house felt too quiet, too aware. And then came the knock. Hesitant. I didn't move at first, hoping maybe he would change his mind, walk away. But then another knock. I sat up, my heart hammering. Eddie! There was a pause, then his voice. Can I come in? I hesitated. I should have said no. I should have pretended I was asleep. But I didn't. Yeah, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The door opened slowly, and there he was, standing in the dim light of the hallway, wearing the same worn-out t-shirt he always slept in. He looked younger like this, softer like the boy I had raised. But there was something in his eyes. Something quiet, something heavy. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself. What's wrong? He shrugged. Couldn't sleep. I nodded because neither could I. For a moment he just stood there, looking at me like he was trying to figure out what to say. Then he sighed and sat down at the edge of the bed, rubbing his hands together. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I forced a laugh, trying to lighten the mood. Welcome to adulthood. But he didn't laugh. He turned to me, his expression serious. You feel it too, don't you? Froze. What? He exhaled, shaking his head. This thing between us. Eddie. I know, he said quickly. I know it's wrong. I know I shouldn't feel this way. But I do. And I think you do too. I couldn't breathe. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out every rational thought. This wasn't happening. He wasn't saying this. You don't know what you're talking about, I said, my voice unsteady. You're confused. We spend too much time together, that's all. It's normal. Normal, he echoed, his voice thick with disbelief. Sabrina, I'm not a kid anymore. I turned away, staring at the wall, willing this moment to disappear. I know that, I said, my throat tight. But I am your mother. He was silent for a long time. Then, so softly I almost didn't hear it, he said, You didn't give birth to me. Closed my eyes. That doesn't change anything, I whispered. Another silence. Then the bed shifted as he stood up. I'm sorry, he said. I looked at him then, and for the first time, I saw him not as the boy I had raised, but as a man standing on the edge of something dangerous. So I did what I had to do. You should go to bed, I said, my voice firm, final. For a moment I thought he might argue. That he might say something else that would tip this fragile balance into something we couldn't come back from. But he just nodded, stepping back toward the door. Before he left, he looked at me one last time. Good night, Sabrina. I didn't answer. I didn't sleep that night. After that, I tried to put distance between us. I stopped working late with him. I busied myself with meetings, with errands, with anything that kept me from being alone with him for too long. But the space didn't help. If anything, it made things worse. One evening, I came home late to find him sitting on the couch, staring at the blank television screen. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the room. I hesitated in the doorway. Eddie. He turned his head slightly, acknowledging me but not saying anything. Did you eat? I asked because it was easier than asking what was really wrong. He nodded. Yeah. I stepped forward cautiously. You okay? He let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. Not really. I swallowed hard. Eddie, we can't. I know, he interrupted. I know, Sabrina. You don't have to say it. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could go back to the way things were. That this was just some passing confusion, that he would wake up one day and realize this was all a mistake. But the way he looked at me told me otherwise. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to fix this. So I did the only thing I could. I turned and walked away. And for the first time since the day I took his hand at that orphanage, I didn't look back. I avoided him for days, maybe weeks. At work, I found excuses to switch meetings, to sit farther away, to keep our conversations brief and professional. At home, I made sure to be out when he was there. I stayed later at the office, took weekend trips to visit old friends, pretended I didn't notice the way he watched me when I finally came home, when we crossed paths in the kitchen or in the hallway. But no matter how much distance I tried to create, it didn't change what had already happened. It didn't change the fact that every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear the way he had said my name that night in my bedroom. It didn't change the way my body betrayed me, reacting to the memory of his touch, the warmth of his hands on my shoulders, The way he had looked at me like I was something more than what I was supposed to be. I told myself it was just because we had spent too much time together. That it was natural for feelings to blur when you shared a space for too long. That if I just ignored it long enough it would pass. But it didn't. One evening I came home late again. I had been doing that often, staying out until I knew he would be asleep, pretending like everything was normal. But as I walked into the house, setting my keys down on the counter, I knew immediately that something was wrong. The living room was dark except for the faint glow of the television. Eddie was sitting there, slouched on the couch, an empty beer bottle resting loosely between his fingers. He didn't usually drink. I hesitated in the doorway. "You're still up?" He didn't turn to look at me. "Yeah." I stepped closer, my voice softer now. "Eddie, are you okay?" He let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "You always ask me that, but you never really want to know the answer." His words stung more than they should have. I crossed my arms, trying to steady myself. "That's not true." He exhaled, setting the bottle on the coffee table. "Isn't it?" I knew what he was talking about. The distance I had put between us, the way I had been treating him like he was something to be avoided, like whatever had happened between us was his fault alone. I sat down on the edge of the couch, careful to leave space between us. "Eddie, we need to move past this." He let out another humorless laugh. "You say that like it's something I can just turn off. You have to." His jaw tightened. He turned toward me then, his eyes dark, tired, searching. "Do you?" I felt my stomach drop. "This isn't about me." "Isn't it?" he asked again, his voice quieter now. "You think I don't notice the way you avoid me? The way you leave the room when I walk in? The way you don't even look at me anymore?" I swallowed hard. "Eddie, this isn't." He moved closer, just enough that I could feel his warmth, his presence. "You don't have to lie to me. I know you feel it too." I shook my head, standing up quickly. "No, you don't. And even if I did, it wouldn't matter." He was on his feet in an instant, blocking my path before I could step away. "It wouldn't matter." I forced myself to meet his gaze. "No." He studied me for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then finally he sighed and stepped back. "Okay." That was it. No argument, no pushing. Just that single word. I wanted to feel relieved. I wanted to believe that this was the end of it, that we could go back to the way things were before. But as I walked upstairs to my bedroom, I felt anything but relief. The next few weeks passed in an uneasy silence. Eddie stopped trying. He stopped watching me, stopped making conversation, stopped lingering in rooms I was in. And I should have been grateful for that, but instead, all it did was leave an emptiness behind. Hated it. I hated the way I missed the sound of his voice when we worked late together. I hated the way I caught myself waiting to hear his footsteps in the hall at night. I hated the way the house felt different without him filling the space between us. And I hated that I had let it get this far. One evening I came home early for the first time in weeks. Eddie wasn't there. The house was quiet, still too big. I sat in the kitchen for a while, staring at nothing, telling myself this was for the best. Then I heard the front door open. I turned just in time to see him step inside. His hair damp from the rain. His jacket slung over one shoulder. He froze when he saw me. For a moment we just looked at each other. Then, carefully, cautiously, he stepped forward. "You're home early." I nodded, my throat dry. "Yeah." Silence. Then quietly he asked, "Are we okay?" Exhaled. "Eddie." He gave me a small, sad smile. "It's okay. I just needed to know." I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him that everything would go back to normal, that we could forget all of this, that I would never let it come between us again. But I couldn't, because something had already broken, something we couldn't take back. And maybe, deep down, I didn't want to. I stepped forward before I could think better of it, reaching out, hesitating for only a second before my fingers brushed his. He stilled beneath my touch, his breath catching. "We're okay," I whispered. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable, his hand warm against mine. And in that moment, I knew that no matter how much distance I tried to put between us, no matter how much I told myself this was wrong, I had already lost.